The Constitution makes it very clear that it is the President who nominates, that confirmation does not occur, however, without the consent of the Senate. In Federalist number 76, Alexander Hamilton wrote, quote, "To what purpose, then, to require the cooperation of the Senate? I answer that the necessity of their concurrence would have a powerful, though in general silent operation. It would be an excellent check upon a spirit of favoritism in the President, and would tend greatly to prevent the appointment of unfit characters from state prejudice, from family connection, from personal attachment, or from a view to popularity." Close quote. In other words, the Senate does have a duty to evaluate the President's nominees. Unfortunately, the situation we face today with the nomination of Heather Higginbottom to be the Deputy Director for the Office of Management and Budget is one of those cases. I do not know her personally, but let me state from the outset that I have no questions about her character. She has many admirers. Senator Kerry, for whom she worked, is an admirer, and I respect that. The President has certainly seeks her appointment and has asked me to try to see that that appointment moves along. I respect his desire to have an up or down vote, and have agreed that we would have this vote, and have agreed for some time. But my concern is with the nominee's budgetary experience. It is the lack of experience that causes me to voice my opposition. Let me first mention the OMB. The Office of Management and Budget has the primary responsibility to assist the President in overseeing the preparation of the federal budget. This is a huge responsibility. In helping the President formulate his spending plan, OMB must evaluate the effectiveness of agency programs, policies, and procedures, assess competing funding demands among all these agencies, and set the priorities and help the President. OMB is not in charge, the President is, but in reality, OMB is the one that raises the concerns with overspending with the various federal agencies. They submit their request, and then the OMB says yay or nay, and it's a very serious matter because very important people are asking for money. And sometimes you just have to say no to very prominent cabinet people. And all the cabinet people can appeal to the President, but they don't do it often. They recognize that OMB is a place where most of these matters have to be decided, and that OMB speaks on behalf of the President. Ms. Higginbottom's experience points to someone who has been on the wrong side, however, of fiscal restraint. Instead of crafting policies to decrease spending, she has been focused on new programs to increase spending. In her Budget Committee questionnaire, she was asked about her qualifications for the job. She cited her legislative and political experience. I believe she worked in a presidential campaign at one point, but cited no direct budgetary knowledge and provided no examples of developing a budget. In one pre-hearing question, I asked Ms. Higginbottom, quote, "Your background is in education and public policy. Outside of your legislative and political experience, have you acquired any budget training, including classes or continuing education?" Close quote. She responded with one sentence, "I have not taken any formal continuing education classes on the budget." I asked her whether she was the primary budget staffer during her tenure in the Senate. She essentially gave a non-answer to that. It doesn't appear that she was deeply involved as a general office Senate staffer in budgetary matters, not the primary staffer, and not a staffer whose senator served on the Budget Committee. In another pre-hearing question, she was asked whether, as a nation, we needed to focus on deficit reduction rather than new spending. She responded by deferring to the President's FY12 budget, stating that it, quote, begins the challenging but essential process of adjusting spending to achieve fiscal sustainability immediately with a 5-year freeze of non-security discretionary spending. Close quote. Now, this is the same budget that adds to the debt every single year and has substantial deficits every single year. During her confirmation hearing before the Budget Committee, in which I was the ranking Republican, she continued to use President Obama's incorrect formulations. And I use that phrase kindly. She testified that President Obama's fiscal FY12 budget, the one he submitted in January, would pay down the debt and, quote, puts us on a path to stabilize our debt, close quote. But this is the same budget proposal that by OMB's own estimate has a deficit of approximately $800 billion in year 10 of the 10-year budget. And not a single deficit in the 10 years of this budget that was submitted to us falls below $600 billion. I would just note that, for example, $600 billion is larger than any deficit President Bush ever had. So in the 10 years, the lowest budget deficit projected by President Obama's his Office of Management and Budget is $600 billion, the lowest. Surely a more experienced, skilled, and serious nominee, one that's acquainted with the great debt threat we have in America, would recognize that these deficits are irresponsible, and you can't say that we're living within our means or we are on a path to stabilize our debt. You can't say that. Even Secretary Geithner, when he testified before the Budget Committee, said the President's budget would be unsustainable if Congress passed it as written. But the Senate Budget Committee was not the only forum in which Ms. Higginbottom was given an opportunity to highlight her experience. She had a hearing before the Homeland Security Committee, and they asked about her qualifications also, which they indicated were lacking. Senator Collins asked her in opening statement, quote, the nominee's background are stated that the nominee's background, while impressive in many respects, does not include a great deal of experience in budget process or financial analysis. Senator Scott Brown used his first question to deal with her experience. He said, I noticed from your resume you have some great political experience and some really good policy experience. I was wondering if you would share with the committee, what type of accounting and budgetary experience you have, close quote. Well, she first attempted to avoid the questions, talking about her general legislative and policy experience. Senator Brown interrupted her and got to the heart of the matter. So I guess my original question is, what type of budgetary and accounting experience do you have? Ms. Higginbottom responded that she was not an accountant and that her goal was to implement the President's policy agenda through the budgetary process. And I would note that the President's policy agenda seems to be primarily to continue extraordinary new and expanded investments, spending in many, many areas of our government. After opportunities to prove that she was qualified through pre-hearing questions and through testimony at 2 confirmation hearings, she was voted out of the Homeland Security and Budget Committees on a party line vote. Our Democratic colleagues in both committees voted her out with the majorities that they had. Because of her lack of experience, not one Republican voted for her. So now a number of my colleagues have argued that the criticism is based on not lack of experience, but on her age, that somehow she's being unfairly treated because of that. And she is young for this job, but the age allegation is not correct. After her confirmation hearing, I sent her a follow-up question. Quote, some of my Democratic colleagues during your hearing before the Budget Committee indicated that when some of us questioned your experience, that we were using experience as a code word for age. The experience I'm concerned about is actual budget experience. And in a pre-hearing question, I asked you the following. This is what I said to her. I asked you this in your pre-hearing. Your background is in education and public policy. Have you acquired any budget training, including classes or continuing education? Your response was, quote, I have not taken any formal education classes. And I asked if these facts had changed, and she basically said no. She said, quote, for over a decade, I've worked at the highest levels of policymaking in the United States Senate and the White House. This work has included, but was not limited to, budgetary implications of those policies. Not budget, but policy issues and budgetary implications of those policies. So the answer to the question that I ask is no, clearly. She simply does not have the kind of serious budgetary experience to be the deputy director at an office that manages a government that is spending $3,700 billion this year and taking in about $2.3 trillion, borrowing 40 cents of every dollar we spend. This is a most august position, and it requires a person who can have the confidence and judgment to say no to people who always want to spend more. Arguably, she would be the least qualified deputy director in decades. The last two nominees in this position had a combined 21 years of budget and finance experience. For example, Rob Neighbors, the most recent nominee before her, served 8 years on the House Appropriations Committee and 6 years at the Office of Management and Budget. Steve McMillan, the nominee before him, served 3 years on Senate Banking Committee and 4 years at the Office of Management and Budget. Hey, you learned something operating out of the Office of Management and Budget. That prepares you to have a leadership role there. Combined, Ms. Higginbottom does not have 1 year of budget or finance experience. Over the last 20 years, nominees for this position have had an average of 6.5 years of experience. Well, in certain circumstances, in certain times, maybe less experience is okay, but a time when this nation has never faced a more serious debt threat, we need real, august, serious leadership. You know, Mr. Erskine Bowles, who co-chaired President Obama's fiscal commission that issued a most serious report to us, warned that if the United States fails to take significant action on debt reduction, the country would face, quote, the most predictable economic crisis in its history, close quote. We're borrowing 40 cents of every dollar we spend. Our nation's gross debt is larger than the entire economy. The last thing we need now is someone who doesn't have the gravitas and to say no to those who always tend to want to spend more. That's just one of the jobs OMB has, to say no. When the Secretary of the Interior or the Secretary of Energy comes before the department asking for the approval of their budget, which calls for more spending, a responsible OMB director or his deputy must be able to say no. Looking at President Obama's fiscal year 12 budget, I'm sorry to say this duty has not been met by Mr. Lieu, the director, and I can't see that he's going to get much strength and support for doing the right thing from this nominee. I supported Director Lieu, but I have been disappointed in his leadership. When the President submitted his budget to Congress, Director Lieu came before the Budget Committee and made some of the most indefensible claims that I've heard in public life. He did. Director Liu said that the president's budget would allow us to live within our means and to begin to pay down our debts and spend only money we're taking in each year. Not one of those claims were true. Multiple fact-check organizations checked them and found them to be false. Even by OMB's own direct reckoning, the deficit would never be smaller than $600 billion at any point in the 10-year budget window. We'd not be paying down our debt. We're not going to be spending only money we're taking in each year under the president's budget. What would happen to a CEO of a corporation if they told potential investors, well, we're living within our means, we'll begin to pay down our debt, we're going to only spend money we're taking in each year, invest in our company. And people invested in the company, and they found out that there was no budget plan in place that showed anything less than huge deficits for the entire next decade, and that the company was borrowing 40 cents of every dollar that it was spending. What would happen then? I'm telling you, he would be sued, if not prosecuted, for fraud. So this is the kind of leadership we have at the budget, and I'm not happy with it. The American people should not be happy with it. They came in to spend, not look the American people in the eye and tell them of the grave financial crisis we're facing in America. Erskine Bowles, heading the commission appointed by President Obama, he told us we're on an unsustainable path. It threatens our economic future, that we are facing the most predictable financial crisis in our history. And when asked when that crisis might occur, when might we have an economic damage arising from our debt, he said 2 years, maybe a little less, maybe a little more. And Alan Simpson, his co-chairman, said, I think it could be less than 1 year. This is not a game we're playing here. We don't need government officials spinning that we're living within our means and paying down our debt. We are running up debt in a fashion never, ever, ever before done in this nation. It's unsustainable, and it's so dangerous because it's systemic, and it's so hard to get off this trend. It's demographics, it's a lot of different reasons, but it's very serious. And we need leaders in OMB who are watching every single dime that's being spent, looking for every effort in place that savings can be effected. That's what we need. And I just don't feel like this nominee fits that bill. She's a good person, she's a good, apparently, staffer, has a lot of friends, but the position of Deputy Director of OMB is a grave position. It has august responsibilities. It requires a most serious person willing to take strong stands and say no to people who want to spend more and more. When asked about our financial situation, on one of her answers, she made reference to the first stimulus bill, the Recovery Act, so-called, and this is what the nominee said. Fortunately, the Recovery Act spending has been extraordinarily transparent, enabling the public to access the job impacts of the various programs funded. Overall, the data demonstrate that the Recovery Act has delivered as promised by creating and saving millions of jobs across the country and has been an essential factor in rescuing the American economy, close quote. Well, I know the nominee is a friend and ally of the president, and I'm willing to give her a vote, and I suppose that she will be confirmed. But I just want to say, I think that's a bit of a Pollyannish description of the success of the stimulus bill. It just didn't meet those standards, and I do feel like that she's been less than rigorous in her understanding of these difficult financial issues that our nation faces. So I encourage my colleagues to join me in opposing the nomination. I thank the chair. Would yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.